Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Nathan Costrin, and with the Motor Safety Association. And today, our webinar topic is going to be on eyewash and emergency shower requirements. We get a lot of questions about what kind of equipment should I have? How do I maintain it? Do I need it at all? And hopefully, by the end of today's webinar, we'll have answered some of those questions you might have, and maybe even touch on some of the things you maybe haven't even considered when it comes to this topic. You may have noticed that your microphones have been muted and they will remain muted for the duration of the webinar. However, if you have any questions as we move through the webinar, please feel free to enter them into the question box and I'll follow up with you at the conclusion of the webinar and answer your questions. I'll also be sending out a couple of very useful resources to help you out at the conclusion of the webinar. I'm going to email that out at the end of the webinar today. I hope that you folks find this to be a little bit enlightening, and some of the topics that we're going to cover off here today, it's fairly straightforward webinar. We're going to talk a little bit about the eyewash and emergency shower requirements here in Saskatchewan, and we're going to discuss a little bit about what our regulations state and what standard that we use actually to understand how to maintain these units and what sort of units we need at our facilities. We're going to jump into the different types of equipment that you could potentially select or need for your business. And we're going to also cover some of the important requirements for each piece of equipment, so stuff that's specific to that equipment. And we're also going to talk about some general requirements that apply to most, if not all, of the equipment. And we'll kind of parse through some of that. And then we'll end off with just a few best practices and tips when it comes to eyewash and emergency shower and maintaining that equipment. So buckle up here. We're in for a good webinar today, and we're going to start out with here in this first section, what does our health and safety legislation say about the requirement for eyewash and emergency showers? And we're going to discuss a very important standard, which is the ANSI standard. That is going to be our guide for compliance and for your organization regarding the installation, use, and and maintenance of this equipment. So first things first, this is very essential equipment. It's important that you have some sort of emergency response equipment in place. Now, depending on what type of business or what kind of operation you have and the hazards that you're facing, this is going to change from obviously one business to the next. And we're going to kind of discuss what those things might look like. But first and foremost, time is critical. If we have somebody that has been exposed to a hazardous substance, especially corrosive substance, time is so essential, so critical. That first 10 to 15 seconds after their exposure is actually the most critical. We need to get that eye or eyes or skin, depending on what's been exposed. We need to start flushing immediately, and delaying treatment even for a few seconds, that could cause or lead to serious injury potentially. So we need to be quick in our response, and we have to have the right equipment in place. Now, emergency showers and eyewash stations, they provide that on-the-spot decontamination. They're going to allow your worker to flush away the hazardous substance in their eyes or on their skin. Sometimes accidental chemical exposures, they can still occur even with proper controls in place and safety precautions being taken. We can still have an incident. So as a result, it's essential to look beyond just the use of your personal protective equipment like your goggles and face shields and safe work procedures. We need to have something as a backup, and that's where the emergency showers and eyewash stations are so essential. They can also be used, or equipment like emergency showers can be effective for extinguishing fires potentially, or clothing fires, or flushing a contaminant off of clothing. So some additional usage there potentially as well. And the last point there, it's required by our health and safety regulations. And we're going to jump into that in just a moment here in a couple of slides. We're going to talk about what does our regulations state here in Saskatchewan. And that's the million-dollar question. What are the requirements here in Saskatchewan for this equipment? Now, this is just a little pie chart here, and it was based on an independent evaluation of over 1,000 plus emergency eyewash and shower units. And what they found during this study was that as many as 78% of these stations were non-compliant, and they were performance related. And what that means is that the equipment wasn't providing first aid. And that was, eye wash, eye face wash, shower. They weren't providing first aid, and that could be for a number of reasons, right? Possibly you didn't have 15 minutes of flush time. Possibly there was a dead leg, or maybe it's froze up, right? Maybe you haven't, or you've got that equipment in an area where it's susceptible to the cold. There's a lot of various reasons why this might be non-compliant, but the number one thing to consider is that 78% of the time it was performance related, meaning the equipment didn't work the way it was supposed to work. The other 10% of non-compliance was missing signage, obstructions in front of the equipment. So, excuse me, things that are maybe less critical to the operation of the equipment, but still very important things to have in place. And then 12% were compliant. So only 12% of people were actually compliant in over 1,000 plus of these units being looked at based on this survey. So that's quite a low number. And like I said, hopefully as a result of this webinar, some of you folks will be in a better position to maintain this equipment. Now comes the legislative piece. What are our requirements here in Saskatchewan? And this is straight from our legislation in the Health and Safety Regulations 2020. And it states for emergency showers, which is in section 21-11, if there may be a risk of substantial contamination of a worker or of a worker's clothing from corrosive or other harmful substances, an employer or contractor shall provide and maintain an approved and readily accessible means of bathing or showering the worker in lukewarm water. The other regulation or second regulation that supports this is 21-12 for eye flushing equipment. And it states if there may be a risk to the eyes of a worker from corrosive or other harmful substances, an employer contractor shall provide at readily accessible locations approved equipment to flush the eyes of the worker with lukewarm water or another appropriate fluid. Now, you may have noticed that I highlighted the word approved equipment, and I did that intentionally, obviously, because that is the key wording that you need to pay attention to is approved equipment. Now, we don't specify how to maintain these pieces of equipment in our regulations for Saskatchewan. However, we do need to defer to some sort of standard for maintaining this type of equipment. And we're going to talk about what that standard is here in the next slide. But I do want to cover off the definition in our regulations for the word approved. And approved means approved by an agency acceptable to the director for use in accordance with any terms and conditions determined by the agency, or approved by a certificate of the director subject to any terms and conditions to the director or the director considers appropriate. Now, what that means in long and short of it is essentially this equipment needs to be approved by our director of the Ministry of Labor Relations and Workplace Safety. And fortunately, what they've done here recently was they go through the regulations, and where we have situations like this where it says approved equipment, they actually further defined what would be deemed approved equipment. And you can actually go onto the Government of Saskatchewan's website and find this information. And under 21-12 and 21-11, the two regulations that we just covered off, they specifically refer to ANSI Z358.1 as being an approved standard to use, as well as they cite the National Building and Plumbing Code of Canada 2020. And the large majority of the equipment that you come across is going to refer to or be marked with ANSI Z358.1. So very, very important piece there, because this legislation supports this standard, which is why we've adopted it here in Saskatchewan as the standard to use for maintaining our equipment. Now, ANSI, who are they? Well, the American National Standards Institute is what that stands for, ANSI. They oversee the development and use of standards by accrediting the procedures of standards developing organizations. Our equivalent here in Canada would be the Canadian Standards Association, or the CSA group. There is actually no Canadian standard for the design or placement of eyewash stations or emergency showers. Hence, why many countries end up adopting the ANSI Z358.1 standard as a guide. And this is adopted not just here in North America, but internationally as well. Now, sometimes you'll see the word, it'll say ANSI / ISEA Z358.1, and just to kind of let you know what that means, or who ISEA is they were the ones who actually wrote the standard, and they're called the International Safety Equipment Association. And they wrote the standard, which defines emergency eyewash and shower design, location, and temperature requirements for the proper functionality and usage, along with guidance on how to properly maintain that equipment. And like I touched on earlier as well, the National Building Code of Canada and the National Plumbing Code of Canada are additional approved standards that need to be considered in the installation of this equipment. And that's another point that's worth touching on here, which we'll do actually at the start of the next section. So ANSI, they've just like any regulatory or any standard, I guess, whether it's our regulations here in Saskatchewan or other standards or regulations abroad, they do amend them from time to time. This one has been revised multiple times. They originally published this standard in 1981, and it's gone through revisions in 1990, 98, 2004, and most recently 2009 and 2014. Some of those revisions included in 2009, the temperature range for water delivery. They clarified that. Simultaneous use, so that would speak to the combination units that we see. Eyewash testing requirements in 2014, they went over design, manufacture, and installation of emergency showers, so getting a little bit clearer on what that needs to look like. Also, the equipment installation location and how far away it should be from the hazard, or depending on where you're working, where those hazards might be in your shop. And they adjusted some of the measurements as well, which we're going to speak to and touch on here briefly. So that's what we're going to jump into right away here, is we're going to have a look at each type of potential emergency equipment here that you might utilize at your business, and what kind of hazards you should be aware of in order to select the proper equipment for your business. As we go through each piece of equipment, we're going to go over the important requirements for each of them based on the ANSI standard. And we'll conclude with kind of some general information that has application to all of the equipment, or most of the equipment. And again, that will be based on the ANSI standard as well. And like I said, I just want to touch on one thing before we jump in here. Anytime you're going to have this type of equipment installed, talk to a qualified technician to do that installation. They're going to consult with the employer based on what the employer figures they require. The employer should consult with their health committee or health and safety representatives, determine what type of equipment that they need, get in touch with somebody who's qualified to install this equipment, and ensure that it's installed properly. And they're going to ensure that your unit's installed according to what the codes are. They're going to meet those ANSI requirements and any sort of other requirements in that plumbing code of Canada. And for the most part, from what I've been reading, is that ANSI standard is going to support a lot of that information and vice versa. So again, make sure that when you install this equipment, that you have somebody who is a qualified technician to do that for you. So what type of equipment should I install? So that's a good jumping point, right? And the need for the emergency showers or the eyewash stations, it's going to be based on the properties of the different types of chemicals that you're going to be using at your workplace and the different types of tasks that you're doing. We recommend doing a job hazard analysis, and that's going to provide you with a bit of an evaluation of the potential hazards of the different jobs and work areas throughout your business. And it's going to allow you to kind of fine tune or hone in on selecting the appropriate equipment. Do we need an emergency shower? Can we get by with just an eyewash? Do we need a combination unit? Those are the types of questions you want to answer, and just keep in mind that the type of equipment that you select should be appropriate and match the hazards that you find at your workplace. So in summer job or work areas, the effect of that hazard may be limited just to the worker's face and eyes. Therefore, an eyewash station may be more appropriate device for worker protection. In other situations, a worker might risk possibly having their full body come into contact with a chemical, keeping in mind how and where these things are stored as well, right? And in those cases, maybe an emergency shower might be more appropriate. So, we want to make sure that we kind of flesh through that and ensure that we have the right equipment in place. Listing your chemical substances. Check your safety data sheets. Those kind of go hand in hand together, right? We can oftentimes go through just our safety data sheet if we're keeping good records there and find a list of all those different chemical substances at our business. What do they say about what we need? Keeping in mind when we do that JHA and we're listing these substances that we want to know which substances are corrosive, which ones are going to cause the greatest adverse effects. And we have to use that to give us a bit of a range, right? What do we use regularly? We're going to have lower risk stuff, but we want to know what's the nasty stuff that we use. And even if you use it very seldom, you still, if you're going to use that at all, you need to make sure that you have the appropriate equipment in place to manage that hazard. We need to know what the first aid measure is if we become exposed. And if it means that we need an emergency shower, then that's what you should be looking at. Your safety data sheet's going to give you a lot of great information, not only just what give you an indication on what type of equipment you should use, but how long I should be flushing my eyes for if I become exposed. How long do I need to flush my skin for? They're going to get into that type of information in those safety data sheets. So again, that's an essential piece of information, and it's a requirement as well. And we're going to cover off that requirement momentarily, that you list the various chemical substances at your business. And then ultimately that is going to help us determine what type of equipment we need and what location we should place that equipment in, right? That location, and we're going to kind of touch on that as well momentarily, but your location should be, it shouldn't be upstairs or 3 flights of stairs when the hazard is on the main floor in the corner of the shop, right? We want to have that equipment as close to the hazard as possible, while obviously being able to maintain that equipment in an appropriate manner too, keeping it clean, making sure it's not being contaminated by whatever it is that we're working with. So those are things to keep in mind when we're doing that equipment assessment. Now, when we're looking at, again, installation, things to consider for hazards. So for eyewash, things like wood shavings, dust, airborne particulates, substances that are corrosive or other harmful substances to the eyes on a regular basis. In a manner that may result in harmful eye exposure. And when I say regular basis, that just means that the substance is being used repetitively. So it's part of your normal work process, right? We might consider the eyewash in that case. In some jobs or work areas, the effect of a hazard might be limited to your face and eyes, right? So an eyewash station appropriate in that situation, but there might be a risk of full body contact with a chemical, and in that case, we have to consider possibly an emergency drench shower. So anytime that we are working with things or handling things that are in large quantities, so the 1 liter or more sort of deal, of corrosive or other harmful substances that might have rapid effects, if we're using them on a regular basis, again, we need to ensure that we have the appropriate equipment in place. In this case, it would probably be a drench shower. So again, quantity is going to influence that as well. And drench showers, again, it says PPE decontamination primarily. Oftentimes that's what they'll be used for. But there's got to be situations too where we, again, if we get splashed or something like that, and it's on our arms or anything of that nature, we're going to want to do more than just run our hands under the tap sort of thing. We're going to want to go and probably take a full shower, make sure that we get not only all of that off of our PPE, but also off of our skin. And then combination units, and combination units are great for everything, right? That's what they're there for, to kind of run the full gamut, if you will. And these would be for chemical exposure of the eyes, face, and body. So it has the ability to flush any part of the body or all of the body, depending on what the situation is. But it's the most protective device that you can get, and it should be used whenever possible. and we'll address a lot of the different issues, or if you're kind of caught somewhere in between. It's also appropriate in work areas where detailed information about the hazards might be lacking, or where maybe there's complex or hazardous operations that involve many chemicals with different properties. So these combination units are phenomenal. And like I said, they kind of run the full gamut, and will cover off anything potentially at your business if you are kind of in that limbo, I guess you could say. So just to kind of support that, the creating a list of chemical substances piece, it states that in Regulation 21-2, which is a list of chemical and biological substances, that you need to develop and maintain a list of all chemical substances regularly handled, used, stored, produced, or disposed of in the course of work processes. Okay, so you need to have a list of all those substances, and also if any of those substances are considered hazardous products. You should be doing this in consultation, or if we have employers on the line or health committee members. This is meant to be an activity that's done in consultation with health committee and health and safety representatives. So it shouldn't just be somebody tackling it alone. This should be the employer having a conversation with their health committees and reps, and ensuring we get this list together. And obviously you're going to work with other folks that are in tune with what's going on in those shops too. So your shop foremen, supervisors, service managers, people like that. And ensure that this list is made readily available to workers. And I would probably just put that list with the safety data sheets as well, or in that same binder, depending on how you store that information. Ensure that it's readily available though. So it should be out somewhere out in the shop. So if your safety data sheet manual or book or binder is stored away somewhere, I wouldn't say that's readily available, right? We want to ensure that workers know where to find this information, and again, that it's readily accessible to them, so that if they need to use it, they have it at their disposal and they can get to it quickly. And that kind of leads well into this next slide, which is worker education and training. Now, when we look at what sort of training is required for this type of equipment, we can lean on Section 22-4. And what your workers need to know about eyewash and emergency equipment like this is they need to know what procedures to follow in case we have an emergency involving a hazardous product. Okay, this should be again developed in consultation with the health committee or safety representative at your place of business, and it needs to result in the worker being able to apply the information, and that knowledge of the workers is periodically evaluated. This is where toolbox talks can be very useful for this, and covering it off throughout the year. Doing a quick demo, right? That training, like I said, if you're doing it at a toolbox talk or your safety meeting, and that you're allowed maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes, go over to the equipment, walk through how it's used, make sure everybody understands how to use that equipment, make sure that they know where to find that list of the hazardous substances, make sure they know how to find where your safety data sheets are and how to access that information in terms of if somebody becomes exposed to a substance, how can we get that first aid information quickly, right? So again, make sure that your workers are trained to this and that they understand how to use the equipment and what the procedure is in case we have an emergency event. So now we're going to kind of blast through the different types of equipment. And as you can see here, there are a few different types that could potentially be at your business. We've got emergency showers, combination units, eye wash and eye face wash stations, self-contained eye and face washes. This is probably going to be one of the more common pieces of equipment that we see, as well as the personal wash stations, which is just the wash bottles. We probably see those two the most, and then drench hoses. So we'll go through each one and kind of speak to what the ANSI standard specifically requires for each unit that you might have at your business. Now, you don't have to take this to memory. I'm actually going to send out a couple of really great handouts that have all of this information in it. And I got a good quick cheat sheet, I guess, if you will, that is going to actually show you every one of these units, what the requirements are, what the measurements are, all those things, so that when you have to inspect or if you need something to kind of fall back on after the webinar, you have kind of a quick cheat sheet that you can review to make sure that you're maintaining this equipment properly. So this is kind of just a nice quick picture here of a drench shower. Typically what we'll see is these will be combination units, but this one is just a drench shower. And it says that the drench shower must provide a column of flushing fluid at least 20 inches wide at 60 inches above the surface floor of the user. That 20 inches, that is, it's just an average measurement of the body width at the shoulders. So this will kind of apply to most, maybe not all, but most people. That's why it is set at that number. And we kind of touched on that was one of the things that they had kind of augmented or changed when they were doing revisions to this standard. And also this is to ensure that that flow pattern of the shower reaches shoulder to shoulder and is going to rinse off your entire body. So it has to be 20 inches wide and 60 inches above the surface floor of the user. And you can kind of see that spray pattern there on the diagram that I have. The flushing fluid column pattern should be between 82 and 96 inches above the surface floor. So that's going to be the bottom nozzle of the shower head, okay? Not that column itself, not the column running up there. It's going to be the actual shower head attached to that. So you don't want it too low or you're going to have a very narrow stream pattern of water. And conversely, if it's too high, that pattern is going to be too wide and not concentrated enough to flush your body off, right? So that was the reason for those measurements being what they are. And the last one is the pull rod cannot exceed 69 inches off the floor. The idea behind that is that obviously that we need to make sure that that rod is accessible for people of all different heights. If it's too high for somebody, it's going to be difficult for them to reach it. So this ensures that people that are shorter in stature will not have any issues activating the equipment should they need to. And the final point there was these drench showers, they must deliver a minimum flow of 75.7 liters per minute for a minimum of 15 minutes, okay? So you have to have that 15 minutes continuous flow. Eyewash and eye face wash stations. So these must deliver, or I should say they should be designed to deliver fluid to both eyes simultaneously. As you can see here on the picture, these eyewash stations, they must deliver a minimum flow of 1.5 liters per minute. And they must ensure that flushing fluid covers the area between the interior and exterior of a gauge at some point less than 8 inches above the eyewash nozzle. Now, sorry I didn't include a picture here of what those gauges look like. Now, what it kind of, just to give you an idea, just think of a small ruler with 2 holes in it for eyes. And essentially those are measured 8 inches, those are measured to be the average distance, I guess, between, one eye to your left eye. Obviously, if you look at a lot of people, or you look around, you're going to see people with eyes that are more narrow, eyes that are more wide. They have it set up in this fashion to ensure that regardless of where you might fall on that spectrum, that you're able to get eyewash fluid to both of the eyes. Now, this, it says to use a gauge. Most people, I don't know if I've ever come across a business that's actually used a gauge. However, what you can use as an alternative to a gauge is just a tape measure. Just a tape measure you have laying around at your business, and just measure that 8 inches out, right? And that's going to give you an idea of whether or not you're meeting that standard or not. So ANSI recommends using a gauge that's based off of the average human eye spacing to ensure that it covers that. But like I said, go ahead. Feel free to use a tape measure as well. That would be equally effective. Sorry, just lost my spot there. There we go. So all nozzles, outlets, and stored flushing fluid must be protected against airborne contaminants. That's why you see those 2 coverings as well that flip on and off of there. We put them on obviously to protect from dust, contaminants, all types of things being getting into those eyewashes. And plus, if we have contaminants, we have things that are getting inside of there, it's going to affect our flow as well. So we want to ensure that we have those dust covers on them. And just because we have the dust covers on them, if they have dust all over the top of the cover, wash the cover off. I don't know how many times I go by these units and they've got dust and crap and grime all over them. And all somebody has to do is grab a wet rag and give it a good wipe. So make sure that you keep them clean and they should work well for you. So this is what a combination unit looks like, and obviously the combination unit is the eye wash, face wash, combined with the shower, so that we can run the full gamut if we need to. If somebody's been badly exposed, this would be the best piece of equipment for them. And it refers to equipment that essentially, when we say combination unit, it just means equipment that shares a common plumbing fixture. As you can see in this picture here, we're getting that water flow from the same unit, and that's going to affect potentially your flow to the shower head or to the eye wash. So again, when we're looking at these units, we have to ensure that the pressure and volume requirements are in compliance with the code as well and the standard, to ensure that we're getting adequate coverage, obviously, and able to actually make sure that this equipment works when we need it. Sometimes you'll actually see drench hose as well as part of this combination. You don't see one here, but sometimes we will see that as part of this equipment as well. And this equipment needs to deliver a minimum flow of 11.4 liters per minute of flow to the combination unit, sorry. So this is probably the most common one that we see, and probably the most commonly used piece of equipment for emergency eye wash. And these are the self-contained portable units. And they need to be installed and maintained according to what the manufacturer's instructions are. And to be quite honest, the majority, if not all of these units, are going to have a sticker that refers to the ANSI Z358.1 standard. Similar requirements apply with plumbed units regarding the unit's ability to provide flushing liquid for at least 15 minutes and also deliver tepid flushing fluid. So this type of unit still needs to provide that 15 minutes of continuous flow, and make sure that they're accessible and free from obstructions. And not just these units, but any eye wash or emergency shower. We don't use them just because we don't use them often, that doesn't mean they should become storage areas, right? So keep that in mind when we're maintaining these units. Have a good look around, make sure that there's a clear path to them, that they're easily accessible. But this is going to be the most commonly used unit that you're going to see. Keep in mind, if you're replacing with water, that water needs to be clean and without visible contamination, so not acidic or alkaline. If self-contained units are used, water must be replaced and or treated according to the manufacturer's instructions, okay? So in the absence of the manufacturer's instructions, you should be, if you're just filling them up with water, that water needs to be changed monthly, okay? And the big reason for that is some of these flushing fluids, they have a longer expiry date because they're made up of a certain type of solution that allows them, just think of it like anything, I guess, maybe in your fridge, right? There's things or additives in there that allow them to last longer. If you're just putting water in this, standing water eventually is going to develop bacteria. And obviously, we don't want to be flushing our eyes with contaminated water. And if you leave that water sit, and I've seen this when I've opened up the tops of these units, you can tell that the water has been in there for an incredibly long amount of time, to the point where even a lot of it has began to evaporate, and you can see kind of the scum and buildup on the inside of the unit. That's not good. That unit's going to have bacteria in it. That water is going to be contaminated, and it's no good, and it's unacceptable. So make sure that if in the absence of those instructions, that we're changing that water monthly, and we should have an inspection tag on there that states as such, and we need to make sure that we're doing our due diligence and marking off or keeping track of those inspections. Okay, and another liquid, appropriate liquid would be acceptable if the supplier indicates that the liquid is good to be used in eye wash. Oops, there we go. These are personal wash stations, aka a fluid or a bottle, eye wash bottle. These units are probably more, or most of you folks probably have these units located throughout your shops. and which is a good thing, okay, because they're designed to provide that immediate but temporary fluid to flush a victim's eyes until you can get them to a permanent eye wash station or a medical facility. But these should never be used in place of emergency shower, of an emergency eye wash. Again, they aren't meant to replace them. They're just meant to supplement them. And on these units, I see it probably 75% of them will have the expiry date on the unit. Some don't, though, or they're very, very hard to find. So make sure that that's printed and it's permanently on that unit, because we need to know, again, when that solution expires, we need to get rid of it, get new solution. And you can't just replace them with water. There's a special fluid that's used in these bottles, and it should remain sealed to prevent any growth from happening inside the bottle until the expiration date. That's kind of the information that I've been led to, but I have also found information that says, again, you can fill it with water, but make sure that that water is dumped out and replaced each and every month. So, yeah. Drench hoses, I don't see a ton of these, but I do see them every now and then. But they're used in order to kind of provide that spot rinse area when a full shower isn't required. They can be used to support self-contained or plum shower eye wash units, but they're not necessarily meant to replace them. These are good for assisting a person or victim when they're unable to stand or possibly they're unconscious. When they're washing under a piece of clothing before the clothing's removed, these are good. Maybe considered an eye wash or eye face wash as well. I've kind of seen them in that capacity too. And yeah, you can see again that dust cover is on top of it. Same thing applies with these. Make sure that they're kept clean. Keep that dust cover on. If it becomes dirty or grimy, give it a good wash. So these are some of the essential requirements for all equipment, regardless, and primarily, I should say, it applies to the emergency eye wash, eye face wash, showers, and combination units. But they need to be accessible within 10 seconds or 55 feet. And they add an addendum to the standard stating that distance because it can be difficult to judge, right? Not everybody walks at the same pace. So 10 seconds to me might be 20 seconds to somebody else. So they did make some revisions to that and understanding that people move at different speeds. So it made most sense to have kind of either or sort of thing. So either 10 seconds or 55 feet from where the hazard is located. They should be located at the same level as the hazard. Like I said, somebody shouldn't have to be walking up stairs to get to this emergency equipment, right? It's bad enough that they can't see. It's bad enough that they might be in a state of panic and pain. And now we've created more obstacles. So remember, that first 10 to 15 seconds is so essential after exposure. And the first thing we need to do is, if we've got one of those wash bottles near us, get them that wash bottle. Hopefully there's one or two people that can assist in the first aid of this, and they can kind of guide that person to whichever type of unit that you've got set up at your facility. But delaying that treatment even for a few seconds, again, it could be very critical and cause serious injury. So make sure that that equipment is located on the same level and that it's easily accessible. There shouldn't be any obstructions on the way to our path in terms of getting access to that equipment. And make sure that it's we've got well lit or highly visible signage as well. Okay, it shouldn't be just kind of hidden off into a corner or tucked somewhere where it's out of the way. We want to make sure that we got good, well lit, visible signage, and it doesn't have to necessarily be illuminated. We just need to make sure that it's highly visible and easy to identify. And then again, keeping it free of obstructions so that we can ensure that somebody can get timely access to it. One of the questions that often comes up is a door considered an obstruction? And a door is an obstruction, actually, but you may have one in place so long as it meets this criteria. The hazard must be that you're facing your business. It must be non-corrosive. It has to be a non-locking door. It has to be push bar activated, like you can see in this picture, and it has to open in the direction towards the emergency first aid equipment. Okay, if you can meet all of those requirements, then you can have a door in place. But if not, then that's a no starter. It's a no go. Some more essentials for all the equipment is it must go from off to on in 1 second or less and remain on without the use of the operator's hands. So once that victim turns that station on, they're going to have other potential issues and things to deal with. So like holding their eyes open, maybe removing clothing, things like that. So we have to make sure as soon as that unit is turned on that it's going to stay on and that there isn't a big lapse or a lag time in getting the fluid or water moving in that unit. So, and we'll talk about that here in a second as well. Deliver flushing fluid for a full 15 minutes. So that's the minimum. Some really hazardous substances that we can't dilute to safe levels, they might require a longer flushing period. And again, this is where the safety data sheets become very essential. They're going to reference that, right? Things like strong alkalis, other corrosives, they might require you to flush for 30 to 60 minutes. It might be even longer than that 15-minute period. So again, that's why we need to really understand what are we working with, what sort of equipment do we need in place? And again, making sure your people are trained and understand that if you get exposed to this chemical, it gets in your eyes, you need to flush for this period of time. Make sure that equipment is accessible, right? That's why you need to know the types of products you have and have those safety data sheets readily accessible to your workplace. Oftentimes when first responders even arrive on the scene, they're going to have that victim finish their flushing period before they take them for further treatment. So that's another thing to keep in mind. When they get on site, they're probably going to ask you, how long have they been flushing for? If you're a person that's helping or conducting the first aid, take a look at your watch when that starts, and ensure that we are going through that full flush period. It's very essential depending on what type of hazards we're working with. Provide a controlled flow of flushing fluid at a velocity and not low enough to not be or to be non-injurious to the user. So that goes for all equipment that's used for flushing, right? Eye, face wash, shower. That victim needs to be able to go through that full flush period, whether it's 15, 30, 45, 60 minutes. They need to ensure that they go through the entire period. And they may already have damage to the skin or eyes from that product. And so we want to ensure that the velocity or the flow isn't going to be at such a high rate that it's actually hurting their eyes. And we'll also talk about tepid water here momentarily, ensuring that the water is the right temperature, right? Because we don't want scalding hot water. We don't want freezing cold water. Again, that's going to influence whether or not that person's able to maintain that full flushing period. And finally, it says if shut-off valves are installed in the supply line for maintenance purposes, you need to make provisions to prevent unauthorized shut-off of that unit. So again, make provisions that someone else in the facility will not turn those valves off, whether it's your maintenance people, whoever's got access to that. You should have these units locked out and ensure that only maintenance people from your facility have that key or access to deactivate the lines for an emergency shower, emergency eye wash. Furthermore, if maintenance is going to deactivate them, they need to inform the correct people, so owners, managers, supervisors, so that they can pass that along to the workers and ensure that they can kind of take the preventative actions so that they don't necessarily require that equipment in the course of their, activities in case they do become exposed. This is probably a big one that gets asked a lot. What are the inspection requirements for the equipment? So this is why you have to have an idea of what type of equipment that we have at our facility, because they're going to vary from one to the other. But it says they must be inspected weekly, right? So excuse me. That is going to go for all equipment. Now, the requirements are a little bit different from one piece of equipment to the other, however. So, excuse me, sorry about that. we need to make sure that the plumbed in units are flushed weekly. And we got to ensure that they're the proper orientation and they've got adequate drainage. So self-contained units, however, they must be visually inspected weekly. And that's just to ensure that our flushing fluid, if it needs replacing, that we can do that, or if it's contained in those bags, that the bag's not punctured, that the fluid's full. So we have a little bit of a difference from the one to the other. So if you've got the self-contained or portable units, just a visual inspection and give it a quick wipe down. It drives me nuts when I see that equipment and the it's full of flushing fluid, but the equipment itself has just got dust and oil and all kinds of grime. Give it a wash, right? If it needs a quick wipe down, grab a wet rag, give it a quick wipe down. Make sure that, if somebody wants to use it, that they look at it and they feel comfortable using it and not like they need to, they'd rather pass on the Eyewash sort of deal, right? And then again, for our plumbed in units, we actually need to run those units and make sure that any sort of dead leg that might be in the piping there, that is eliminated. So very simple to do. Doesn't take much time. So ensure that the equipment's turned on for the plumbed in units and that it stays on long enough to clear that dead leg in the piping, ensure there's no sediment or bacteria buildup, and that you have proper flow of water from the head of the device. And that's it. And then again, for your portable units, just have a quick look at them. Give them that visual inspection, ensure that our fluid is topped up and you're good to go. So what else do we have here? Yeah, and like I said, I think this one gets missed a lot. I think some people think that, oh yeah, Z Medical, they check it every quarter. They check it when they're here. That's not sufficient. You have to do your own inspection, and again, weekly is the requirement for all of your units. So needs to be done on a weekly basis according to the ANSI standard. It's great that Z comes in and they check that equipment, but they only come by quarterly. I maybe you've got them set up to come in monthly, but again, we're still not meeting that standard if they come in monthly. So again, just quickly, all it is a quick drive by, right, of the equipment for the most part, unless we've got the plumbed in units and we need to run them. And just like I said, clear out any sediment in that dead leg. So that will get you covered for your ongoing inspection. And then there's the annual inspection requirements. So all emergency Eyewash, face wash, shower combination units, they all require a annual inspection to ensure their conformance with the ANSI standard. Plumbed in and self-contained units, they must be protected, by the way, from freezing and must be inspected annually. That annual inspection is going to be a more comprehensive assessment to ensure all the items that we covered are compliant. So for those plumbed in units, it's making sure that they can, and you need to run them for the full 15 minutes. We have to ensure that they have a minimum 15-minute continuous flow. So you need to run it for 15 minutes, ensure that it can run that long, and it's going to give you 15 minutes of continuous flow, and ensure the system can properly drain off the amount of water needed to be used or run in that period of time. I don't foresee that being a big issue, but certainly if drainage is an issue, it's going to come up during this annual test, and at that point you'd have to address it, right? And again, you're going to redo those measurements that we had covered off on the shower. So you're going to measure the pool rod, shower head, the streams for the eye and face wash. All that stuff needs to be measured. And again, I'm going to give you folks a quick cheat sheet that is going to allow you to see exactly what all needs to be covered in there. So let's cover off some best practices here really quickly to wrap things up. The ANSI standard doesn't specify how long each body part should be rinsed for. Again, this is where we want to defer to our safety data sheets because they're going to give us more information on that. They're going to allow us to see exactly how long we need to be flushing for. Oftentimes we'll see a recommended 20-minute flushing period depending on the nature of that contaminant. But for the most part, you can follow this 5 minutes for non-irritants or mild irritants, 15 to 20 for moderate to severe irritants, and then chemicals that cause acute toxicity if absorbed through the skin, 30 minutes for most corrosives, and 60 minutes for strong alkalis and certain types of corrosives as well. So again, know what you're working with, know what the requirements are, have a good read through your safety data sheets. That's going to kind of guide you in which direction you need to go. Evaluate your equipment location. As you guys can see in this picture here, we've got tires and rims that are completely blocking off this first aid area. There's an Eyewash in there. There's first aid equipment in there. And we can barely see it, right? Some decent signage, I guess, but as you can see, the signage is even getting dusty and old and kind of falling off. But this is an example of how not to do it, okay? Let's ensure that we've got adequate space here in these areas, and that's space for the equipment. That's to make sure it's accessible. That's to ensure that when we have first responders that show up, that they're able to fulfill their activities and assist and help that victim. So ensure that we don't have obstructions like this in front of our first aid and emergency equipment. Okay, that's essential. Keep in mind, it has to be within 10 seconds or 55 feet. Sorry, it says 50 from the hazard source. And make sure that we train our employees on how to access and activate the equipment in the event of emergency. I have it under here as best practices, but these are not just best practices. These are part of the regulations and the standards as well. I just wanted to recap them in here because they are extremely important when we're looking at this type of equipment. Provide beyond tepid water. So the ANSI tepid water range is between 60 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 16 to 38 degrees Celsius. To be quite honest, 16 degrees Celsius is still a little too cold. 38 is still a little too hot. Try and get that number as close to being somewhere in the middle as possible, because we want to provide the maximum amount of comfort for the person that's flushing their eyes. So get a thermometer, test this, try and aim for something in the middle, because one of the number one causes for people leaving or abandoning the flushing process too early is because the water was too hot or the water was too cold. Okay, so we need to make sure that we've got it kind of just at that sweet spot, and that we can provide the maximum comfort to that worker or victim. And last but not least, some exposure. If you become exposed or you have a victim that you're dealing with, remind them, remove your contacts and don't rub your eyes. Okay, rubbing your eyes can oftentimes make things a lot worse than what they are. I've actually experienced this with something. It wasn't a chemical per se, but I did it actually with Tiger Balm. I was using some Tiger Balm on one of my joints or joint areas, and I actually ended up falling asleep, I remember, on my bed, and I actually woke up and I remember I had kind of touched by my eyes. And then next thing you know, I was kind of rubbing by my eyes, forgetting that, oh my God, I forgot to wash my hands after this. And the rubbing actually activated the Tiger Balm that much more. It made it significantly worse, and it wasn't a good situation. The same thing applies to different chemicals, corrosives, things like that. Rubbing your eyes can make it a lot worse. So make sure that you get flushing fluid to them as soon as possible. Remove your contacts if you have contacts in. Disrobe completely and provide privacy curtains and a gown. So make sure that if we have the emergency showers, that we have gowns available. So if somebody needs to use that shower or a combination unit and they need to run the full thing, make sure that they have a little bit of privacy. So make sure that we've got gowns available for them. In those instances, do a bump test before a high-risk task. So yeah, you might be inspecting it weekly, but just to ensure that station is going to work the way we need it to in case we become exposed. If you're using something that you know is highly hazardous and we're engaged in those types of tasks with that type of hazard, go and do a quick bump test. All a bump test is turn the equipment on, run it for 20, 30 seconds, make sure that it's operational, and then go about your work. That bump test, though, is just going to allow you to ensure that if we need it, that it's working and everything's good to go. And it's also, again, going to help flush that line out of any stagnant water, remove any dead lag that might be in that piping as well. And also be cautious when you're assisting other people. as not to contaminate yourself. You might need to just give them verbal guidance, right? But don't go rushing in and get yourself contaminated as well, because the only thing worse than having one victim is now having two victims, right? Because now we've really got a situation on our hands. So make sure that you're cautious when you're assisting other people, and if you need to go and grab some gloves and wear the appropriate PPE, then go ahead and do that. But again, be cautious that we don't contaminate ourselves in the process and we don't have two victims instead of one. So that brings us to the conclusion of the webinar. I hope you folks really enjoyed it. Stay tuned. If you're attending live here today, I'm going to be sending out some good information from WorkSafe Saskatchewan about emergency eye washes here. They've got a good article on that. I'm going to send that out, as well as a company out of the US called Bradley. They put together actually a nice pamphlet which summarizes the ANSI standard requirements, and it's a quick compliance guide, which I thought would be really helpful because it'll give you something to reference back at your work, or if you forget, you've got something that's easily accessible and that's going to be kind of quick to review without going through the entire standard. So I thought that was really, really good. I'm going to send that out to you folks by email. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, or feel free to get a hold of us directly. Be more than happy to answer your questions. Feel free to give us a call at 306-721-0688, or you can email info@motorsafety.ca if you'd like a little more information. They can put you in touch with me and I'll reach out to you directly. And please go on our website, www.motorsafety.ca. A lot of great, useful information there on the website for you folks. We can register for more courses, webinars, safe work practices, procedures, whole bunch of stuff on there that's really good for you. Please take advantage of that. And yeah, that brings us to the end here, folks. So thanks again so much for joining us. I'm going to review the questions and, like I said, answer you directly. But thanks a lot for being here today. Hope you folks have a safe spring. We're heading into spring here in about 2 weeks. So hopefully we get some spring weather. Enjoy. We'll be seeing you folks down the road. Take care for now, and we'll talk to you soon.